Praised be Jesus and Mary. In the spiritual life, there are really no such things as little things or unimportant things. St. Benedict, in the rule that he wrote for monks, in more than one place reminds them that they are to prefer nothing to the love of Christ. And then in that rule, in that lengthy rule, he lays out for them a way of life, a detailed way of life, so that in everything they might serve Christ, for whom they have given up everything. And he exhorts them not to disregard even the most minute precepts of that rule, but rather to observe it fully, so as to serve Christ wholeheartedly. St. Benedict was born in Italy in a region called Umbria around the year 480. He studied in Rome initially, in that eternal city, but soon was disenchanted with the world, with the worldly life in the city, and also just the decadence of the culture of the time, which was falling to pieces. The Roman Empire was in its agony. So he left Rome and dedicated himself to God alone, living in a grotto outside of Rome for some time. After initial difficulties with the monks whom he tried to reform, he built several monasteries together with his first followers. Most famous is the Monastery of Monte, Cassino, which he built in southern Italy, and where he wrote the rule for monks. Through his monasticism, he spread Christianity through all of Europe and made European culture Christian, and he died on March 21st of 547. His impact is still felt today, and this principle of his, to prefer nothing to the love of Christ, should always be something that we examine ourselves on in our spiritual lives, because again, there are no such things as little things. Although we categorize some things as little, it's those things precisely that can actually be the biggest obstacles in our spiritual life, because we tend to call little that which we cling to most. Those things to which we're most attached. And as an excuse, we call them little because we don't want to do the will of God in certain areas, or we want to neglect the will of God. And they're big because in some things, where St. Benedict says, prefer nothing to the love of Christ, well, in these little things, we prefer something to the love of Christ. And that's big. And that's a big obstacle in the spiritual life to growth, and above all, to sanctity. And the only way we can call them little is that they become a bottleneck for us, for God's grace. These things become little because there, God's grace cannot flow down to us abundantly. We cannot accept it because we can have a certain contempt for it. Whereas these little things could become big channels of grace if we pay no attention to them, if we disregard them, if we neglect them, if we prefer something to the love of Christ, well then, they're big, and they're big obstacles. So we should examine ourselves constantly on these so-called little things. But in reality, they're not bigger than we think. They're not keeping us from loving God with our whole heart, which, as St. Benedict reminds us, is the whole point of the spiritual life, and which we, too, like him, should strive after every day and in every detail of our daily life. Praised be Jesus and Mary.